Good morning. Welcome, everyone. As usual, we have our monthly Ask Me Anything call, and it comes after the Council of State meetings, which we just returned from. So we're looking forward to having you all on the call where you can ask any question that you like. Obviously, something that has been in the news recently is the debt affordability study. And Dan, let's confirm who's on the call, please.
Yeah, so can we just get a quick roster call here, who we have joining with us?
This is Jeff with the County Compass newspaper in Pamlico County.
Okay.
This is Julie with the Carolina Journal in Raleigh.
Others?
Let's go ahead and roll.
All right,
Ready?
so we're ready. Someone has a question for the treasurer?
Well, I would love his, Dale, you've just given us a commentary on the debt affordability study. I'm curious, is Governor Cooper going to take this study for nefarious purposes?
Well, this, like so many things we do at the Treasurer's Office, they're not emotional and not political, they're mathematical. The debt affordability study is a bipartisan committee, and the results of that study and commission are supposed to be non-political. We are disappointed that the governor has politicized this, but in biblical terms, there's nothing about the state debt availability that was different the day after that study than it was the day before that study. It was true yesterday, it's true today, and it's true tomorrow. The things that I think about when I think about the Debt Affordability Commission and the study itself is that when I became the treasurer of North Carolina, I insisted that these unfunded liabilities, which I consider debt-like obligations, and if you ask any public servant across North Carolina and ask them whether they are expected to receive pension payments and health care for the rest of their life, I would say that they would all answer that question yes. So when you have that obligation out there, these are what I call debt-like instruments. So 3 years ago, we put the unfunded pension and health care liabilities into the debt affordability study for the first time in North Carolina history. Along with that was the notion that we created a solvency fund so that we can actually start taking money similar to the rainy day fund for the operating budget of the state of North Carolina, but actually start taking money and putting it toward these unfunded pension and health care liabilities. This has become even more important over the last several months when the greatest investor of our lifetime, who normally talks about stocks and bonds, made the following comment, that any company that's thinking about expanding or relocating in the United States of America had better look at what the unfunded liabilities are of the pension and health care, not only of the state they're going to, but the community they're going to. So my point is I try to close down your question is that the state does have debt capacity. There are obviously needs out there. There is hardly any debt capacity. The governor has maxed out the credit card for the transportation debt capacity. We've now received another request for $100 million possibly to get the DOT through the month of February. That's if we can rely on the numbers we're given. And so we're focused on other issues. It has been brought up in a couple of interviews about the need for public school construction. I am an 8-year member of the Forsyth County School Board in the past. That school board was known as one of the first school systems to actually go to the voters and get approval for bonds and build and repair schools under budget and under schedule. So I know a little bit about that situation. The unfortunate thing about what the governor said is very simple. To politicize the important issue of public school construction is just not acceptable. The question I get across this state more often than any when it comes to any topic that has the word education in the sentence, The question I get most often, or the comment I get most often is, I thought the lottery was supposed to take care of that. I hear it every week across North Carolina. And in this particular instance with public school construction, the voters, their instincts are exactly correct. I was on the floor when the lottery passed. 40% of the lottery proceeds were supposed to go toward public school construction. If that had occurred, we would have had nearly $3 billion set aside for public school construction over the period of time the lottery has been in existence, and would have been able to do that without issuing any debt at all on the taxpayers of North Carolina.
Follow-up question?
Well, this is Dave Mildenberg. First, Dale, you hold these for media, and we're objective here. This isn't about casting aspersions on either on public officials. So I just want to dissociate myself from that first question. He says that there's debt capacity for $11 billion over 10 years. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, so if he wants to build a lot of schools, I mean, why is that political? I mean, there are a lot of people who want kids to be in, new modern schools. I mean, that's a valid point of view, right? It's not, you may not agree with it, but it's not a politicalization.
Well, actually, the way you fund it is great point, Dave. The way that you fund it is highly important. And my point I was trying to make is that there is a mechanism, there is a process, and there is money for the important issue of public school construction, especially in rural North Carolina.
Yeah.
It's just not being done. And what I'm saying is if you put the lottery money where it's originally supposed to be toward public school construction, there would not be a need to issue debt. And the governor knows that.
Yeah. But when there is pressure from the courts and from, studies that there needs to be massive investment in our state's K-12 system, is it the treasurer's role to get involved in the nitty-gritty on how that is accomplished?
Well, actually, we're not involved in that nitty-gritty at all. We didn't intend to ever say anything about the debt affordability study. The governor came out with a press release within 10 minutes of when the whole meeting convened, but 3 days before we were actually sending it to him. So we were in this whole situation. We've been reacting, but the issuance of bonds and how you fund these important issues of education and capital building needs for public education, especially in the depopulating parts of North Carolina, that originates in the General Assembly.
Yeah. Okay.
Anything else, Dave?
Well, just final question. You raised the lottery issue. Is there any movement in the General Assembly, for those of us who don't follow this closely, to tighten up the way that those resources are used?
It's my understanding that when the lottery was passed, that was not my understanding. I was sitting there. So it's my observation that 40% of the lottery proceeds were going to go toward public school construction. And more importantly, Dave, this is a very important point, that the money follow the child.
Right.
Number one. And what I've said about these bonds all along is it's important that the money follow the child, but it's equally important that you don't penalize those communities who have invested, who have gone to the voters and issued debt, that those communities not be penalized through any statewide bond issue regarding public school construction. Now, to specifically answer your question, I don't know the exact number. We can get it for you before lunch. But it started out 40% of this money was supposed to go toward public school construction. I think it got to a low of around 14 or 15%. And now over the last 2 years, especially in the latest budget, there's been a movement to take it back up gradually toward that 40% level. So we have bottomed out in terms of the money being taken from the lottery proceeds for public school construction, and we're back in going in the right direction so that this money will be freed up for that specific purpose.
Thanks for taking our questions, Dale.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi, this is Julie jumping in. I just had a quick question about some of the, unfunded liabilities that are mentioned in that report. The S&P had mentioned that it was going to start calculating in some of those softer unfunded liabilities into potentially the bond ratings, that it might be a little bit more hard-nosed about accounting for them. What are your concerns going forward with that?
My concerns are in the way that a lot of people respond in this state who are connected with the military when somebody says something, and the word is I. What I means is that I understand what you've told me, I've heard what you've told me, I've understand what you've told me, and I'm going to do something about what you've told me. That's what that means in the military. That's exactly what that means when I've been dealing for the last 3 years with the rating agencies. Unlike others, I've only go to New York maybe once or twice a year, and a lot of the interviews we have with the rating agencies we do now through Skype. And I can tell you on my last physical visit to New York that there are whole departments being formed, Julie, at the rating agencies to specifically look at these unfunded liabilities. Now, in North Carolina's case, we just did a stress test with Pew that showed that our pension plan was one of the 6 best funded in the United States. Along with that, Moody's came out with a report 2 months ago that said that we weren't number 6, we were number 1. We were number 1 in the United States in terms of our ability to fund the pension plan in an economically challenging environment. Number 1 in the country. So we're very, very proud of that on the pension plan. The health plan is the complete opposite. It is one of the most insolvent in the United States. And the rating agencies, to your point, are specifically looking at this, and is the reason, before I ever went to New York, before I ever talked to any rating agency about this subject, within 4 weeks of when I was sworn into public office, I insisted that these unfunded liabilities be part of our Debt Affordability Commission. That's how your question connects back to all of this that's going on. It is a serious matter, and that's why also that we've been driving so hard toward clear pricing, because one of the biggest components of our $32 billion unfunded healthcare liability is the growth rate in hospital and prescription drug costs over the next 20 years. And we all know from this phone call that when you start looking at something over 20 years with a very high inflation rate associated with it, and you discount it back into today's dollars, it's absolutely frightening what that does to our obligation. And that's why we're driving towards solving all these problems. So we heard what the rating agencies have said, we understand what they're saying, and we're trying to do something about it through the Solvency Fund, through the Clear Pricing Project, and matters such as that.
Quick follow-up. I know that no money has been appropriated into the Solvency Fund yet, although obviously that's something that you're pushing for. If nothing changes, could the unfunded liabilities begin to impact the state's AAA bond rating?
Well, to your earlier point, I think the answer is that what they want to see is they want to see progress. And let me give you 2 examples, since Dave's on the phone from Charlotte, of progress. The city of Winston-Salem, well, sometimes it's said that, the treasurer's just bringing this up because of some new accounting standard. Nothing could be further from the truth. The fact is that the city of Winston-Salem foresaw this issue 32 years ago. And the city of Winston-Salem documented 32 years ago start putting money toward these liabilities that they know they would eventually have. The city of Winston-Salem has about an $84 million unfunded health care liability, and they have over $63 million sitting in the bank to pay for it. Then the city of Charlotte, and that was Lars Coakley in Winston-Salem, who's actually on the investment advisory committee for the pension plan, Lars Coakley did this in Winston-Salem. The city of Charlotte started picking up on this and said, boy, if Winston-Salem has this problem, just imagine how big our problem is. So over 2 decades ago, the city of Charlotte started doing the exact same thing of putting money aside. And the city of Charlotte has over $115 million sitting in the bank today to pay for their unfunded liabilities just for the city of Charlotte. Most recently, in the last 2 years, through the local government commission, it gives me an opportunity to remind everybody on the call that our local government commission's meetings are now available online, by telephone for listen-only mode, and that's happening this afternoon. But the local government commission 2 years ago did a refinancing for the Charlotte airport. And when we pointed out that refinancing was going to produce millions and millions of dollars worth of free cash flow to the Charlotte airport because they were something they have no control over, which is where interest rates were. So they were able to save millions and millions of dollars by refinancing that debt, which we did through the Charlotte Airport Authority. And when we explained to them what their unfunded pension and health care liabilities were, it's my understanding they took care of all of it. I mean, that is what the rating agencies, back to your original point, Julie, that is what the definition is. I hear you, I understand you, I'm doing something about it. Those are concrete examples inside the state of North Carolina over the last 3 decades of people who have actually acknowledged and done something about this important issue. And what we're trying to do is get the state to do the same thing.
Do you expect the unfunded liabilities to ding other states' credit ratings going forward in the next decade or so?
Well, I had to choke up on that one. Absolutely. And if you read the press, for example, the governor of South Carolina in the last week has announced that he's going to put forth a proposal to end the pension plan for public service workers in South Carolina for new hires, for example. So this is and the reason is that the South Carolina pension plan, Julie, is only 54% funded this morning. The Alabama retirement system is only 64% funded this morning. One of the Kentucky retirement systems is less than 30% funded. Less than 30% funded. Our pension plan is in the high 80s. We'd love for it to be 100%, but it's not. So this is going to have a major impact, and that's why, as going back to Dave's question, we're not politicizing this. I mean, we're doing what we think is necessary to make sure that this state is not just a follower, but a leader on these issues. Because imagine what this state, as much economic development that's going on in North Carolina right now, if we were known as the state that was solvent regarding these health care and pension liabilities, if we were known as the state that had transparent health care, the Secretary of State's office couldn't stay open enough hours of the day to register all the companies that would want to come here. This is going to be, and Julie, I would say for the rest of my lifetime, based on my life expectancies, these two issues are going to dominate what happens as far as where people move, where businesses move, and the solvency of the states themselves over the next 20 years.
All right. And one last question about that. I was curious with the, let me check in my notes. With the discount rate set lower than most states, but still relatively high in terms of what we're actually earning, what's the asset mix now for the state pension plan in terms of high risk versus low risk?
Well, thank you. And for those others on the call, the discount rate she's referring to is the assumed rate of return for the pension plan. For most of our lifetimes on this call and in this room, that assumed rate of return was 7.5%. When I came into office, it was 7.25%. Over the last 3 years, we've lowered it to 7%. This pension plan, over the last 21 years on average, has not hit any one of those numbers. And so we're very cognizant of that. And that should give you an idea that if we're one of the best funded in the United States, that should give you an idea of what's going on in the other states. So let me sort of put a bow on this, on your question, Julie. and this is the most perverse thing you'll hear all week, the better funded your plan is, the harder it is to do the right thing and lower the assumed rate of return. Because every time we lower the assumed rate of return by not 50 basis points, but a half of 5 basis points, anytime we lower that assumed rate of return, the amount of funding that has to come into the General Assembly goes up. But more importantly, the amount of funding that has to come in from local governments goes up. This year, we're looking at an employer contribution rate for the state of 15% of payroll. Just for health care. Just for pension liability. 15% of payroll. The county and city contribution rate is lower than 15%. So this is a real major issue across North Carolina. So what I'm saying to you, Julie, is that I would love to adjust this rate of return down to a level that better represents what we think the rate of return is going to be over the next 20 years. Our consultants have told us, and this is the treasurer's, former treasurer's consultants as well as the same folks who are here now, show us that there's less than a 50% chance of hitting that assumed rate of return over the next 5 and 10 years. So it is a very major issue, and going back to the earlier question, the rating agencies are looking at this. The second thing I want to add regarding that is that we're always communicating with both the city governments, the county governments, obviously the state government as it relates to how all this works. But the bottom line is that we're continuing to focus on making sure that we have an assumed rate of return that is more in line, but understanding that every time we lower it by just a smidgen, it increases the cost on all of our customers, and so they have to be partners in all this. One of the other states that has a pension plan that's less than 30% funded just put out a press release over the last 15 months that said they're lowering it, Julie, to your point, to 5.5%. They're not they're not funding it. They weren't funding it at 8. They weren't funding it at 7. They weren't funding it at and now they said we're lowering it to 5.5% to be more realistic. But if you're not funding it, none of that matters. And so that's why we're focused on what we're doing. The other thing I would say, when you look at our consultants, and I'll make this very quick, when we're compared to our peer group, this pension plan has always, all the way back to Edwin Gill, been considered one of the more conservatively managed pension plans in the United States. And right now, as we sit here, we're about at a 60-40, about 40% in fixed income and about 60% in growth type investments, which are private equity, public equity, real estate, alternative investments, and opportunistic fixed income. So we're still at a 60-40 in terms of our asset mix, which was part of your original question.
All right, thank you. That'll be it for me.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Anyone? If not, we'll go to some closing remarks from the treasurer.
Thank you all for joining us. I would say, if you're still on the line, that we would love for the federal government to have a debt affordability study. We would love for the federal government to have a debt affordability commission. And I would say, as someone who is spending an enormous amount of hours every day with the what's going on with the North Carolina Department of Transportation, we'd love the federal government to be paying any bill that they owe the state of North Carolina for any purpose as it relates to transportation. So we thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to speaking to you next month.